He is the CEO of Aspire Consultancy, and that is providing public services to the public and the private sectors. He is a man of wisdom and knowledge. He has insight not only about what's taking place in the United Kingdom, but how it relates to the rest of the world. And I'm super excited to present to you award-winning leading voice in diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Carlton Brown. Buckle your seatbelt and get ready for the podcast that will take you on a special journey designed to elevate and empower your cross-cultural appreciation for communities around the world. Hello, I'm Carole Copeland Thomas. I'm your host of Conversations with Carole, the weekly show that connects culture with collaboration and community. Welcome aboard. Hello, Dr. Brown. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much. And it's lovely to see you. I hope you're well, Carole. And thank you
Yes,
very much for inviting me.
I'm so glad that you're with us. And for those who are watching this video, you're going to say, why is Carole's mouth crooked? Well, I will know after I go to the dentist today. I have something going on here, and it's not very pleasant to look at, but I'm still able to eat and talk, and so that's okay.
Well, you
But
look
Dr.
well
Brown,
to me, though, Carole.
thank you very much. Tell us your location. Are you outside of London? Do you live in London? Give us that information.
Well, I lived in London for many years, and I literally just live in the suburbs outside of London now.
Awesome.
So we moved there
Ah,
just five
very
years
good.
ago.
Very, very good. Well, we're going to get into your background in just a minute, but you have a very important book that is going to be published, I think, in the summer at this point in time, and it's called The Race Paradox: Why Organizations Fail on Race. That is a title, and that's going to really much mirror our whole conversation in terms of the comparison between the United Kingdom and the United States and elsewhere. But this book is going to be so essential. Give us the value added with the race paradox, Dr. Carlton Brown.
That's a really interesting question. So the paradox, if I could give you contextually set this narrative, the race paradox is about this disconnect between what organizations talk about and have intention about versus what they actually do and being very, what I describe as being very performative. The actual definition, we describe it as this unconscious illusion of inclusion. So, in other words, there are lots of things that organizations purport to do. So, they'll celebrate things such as, let's say, Black History Month or Pride or Women's International Day or a myriad of other religious festivals throughout the year. But then when you strip away the organization and look at in the organization from a forensic look and say, well, tell me what your senior leadership team looks like, or show me your last 10 promotions or your 10 hires. What does that really look like in real terms? And what we do realize is that there's a real disconnect. There's a lack of diversity and lack of representation in terms of race in those same organizations. So on one hand, they're saying we're going to be champions of something, and then the next hand, actually, their reality is somewhat different. And if we look back in recent history, and I look back at 2020 after the murder of George Floyd as a good example of that, there was lots of public proclamations and statements and money advocated for change. And yet, still 5 years later, here we are. And some of those same organizations have taken away what they described as funding or advocacy to diversity initiatives. And I don't like the terms initiatives because I think that's short term. Whereas I think diversity is meaningful. And I think the race paradox, why organizations fail on race, actually race and diversity actually lends itself really well to organizations and to businesses. Now, let's give you a very simple example. McKinsey did a report in 2023, and they've done a series of reports, I think 2018 and 2015, respectively. And they specifically look at things such as race and gender and diversity within organizations. And I think their survey was about 1,200 businesses, organizations. And out of the 1,200, what they did, they reviewed the top 25% of those businesses, organizations, in terms of performance, productivity, profitability. and they compared it against the bottom 25%. And what they discovered in terms of race and gender is that the top 25% of those organizations were 36% more likely to improve and do better when they had diverse people in the room and they had females in the room. So diversity shouldn't just be a moral imperative. It should be a business imperative. It's good for business. So the paradox speaks to this, right? So the paradox talks about, what are the challenges? What are the root causes of some of this stuff? And then ultimately we have to be solution led, right? Because without solutions, we just stay static. And one of the questions when I work with organizations is ask them the question, where have you been in the last 5 years? What's your structure looked like over the last 5 years? Has it fundamentally shifted? Despite having diversity training, despite having networks within your organization that speak to diversity and race or gender or sexual orientation, regardless of all of those things, have your organization fundamentally changed? And if the answer is no, the question is, why not? So that's what we're trying to do.
Ooh, whoa. I mean, I'm taking notes. And the one thing that struck out to me at the beginning of your reply was it's performative. It's almost like perfunctory, is that
Yeah,
you're doing diversity because you have to do it, but there's nothing internally and from an infrastructure perspective really speaking to the heart and soul of diversity. And then the illusion of inclusion, that it's interesting. My brother uses that term when we think we've arrived, per se, and then you're slapped back into reality. So you've talked about that. And then for as an American, we're looking at the moment in time in the summer of 2020, after George Floyd had been murdered, and the world erupted, not just the US, but the
mhm,
UK, all over the world, they erupted. And you're correct, Dr. Brown. Then all these companies worldwide stepped up and they talked about what they were going to do and who they were going to hire, la di da di da. And fast forward, we now have here in the United States Donald Trump, and you have so many companies that are retreating from their very words. That is so significant. And that to me gives us an indicator about how, yeah, we've come a long way, but we have so much further to go because of what hasn't been done and just stripping away in terms of the integrity of DEI and how in the study that you cited, where companies that are really doing it, they're outperforming the others because
absolutely.
they've internalized the importance of it from a business perspective.
Yeah, but don't forget, and I think, Carole, it's really worth noting here this. There was a study some time ago, and I can't remember the reference point, but from a UK perspective, there was a study done which talks about Black and African Caribbean were 8 to 12% more likely to bring innovation and creativity to the table. Now, if you think about any business, one of the things that you look for is innovation, right? And
Right.
creativity. You want to bring something new to the table. And
Hmm.
though, Peter Drucker talks about having this thing called a competitive advantage.
Hmm.
So if you want a competitive advantage, what you want is bright people, innovative people, creative people in your business that they can do something that is different, that is
Hmm.
challenging, that's going to bring new innovations to the market. So by having those people and challenging and bringing that level of creativity to your business, actually, it's a real advantage. There's a
Right.
bonus. There's a bonus to diversity.
Hmm.
So it adds value, not a disincentive. And I think it's all too familiar that people think about diversity and they think, they often think of African, Black, Caribbean, African American, Hispanics, Latino, Asian. So they think, but actually, when I look at the states, the main beneficiaries of diversity initiative are not African Americans. I think they
No,
come
who are they? Look, drum roll, Dr. Carlton Brown. Who benefits most from DEI in the United States?
so white females are the
There
main
you go.
beneficiaries.
Bing,
It,
bing,
it,
bing.
you know,
Yes.
so and then and I think African Americans come down the scale of about number nine or so,
Hmm.
from
Hmm.
memory. So what I'm saying, but creating a diversity role. We know that after George Floyd, there was a myriad, a flux of people being promoted into roles,
Right.
and often they were African Americans and females
Mm-hmm.
uh, put into positions of influence. But ultimately, they can't solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
They can, on individually, it's got to be a collective, strategic approach. It has to
Correct.
be part of your value proposition. It
Mm-hmm.
cannot just be, well, we've hired Carole over here, and Carol's going to solve. Hey, Carole, we got to. You're our diversity lead, therefore you're going to
Mm-hmm.
solve all of our issues. You're not
Mm-mm.
ultimately. And is it a cosmetic exercise that people put you in place to say, well, we've got someone who's a champion here in our organization? I'm not saying this is across all organizations. I think
Right.
there are, and I need to really describe and give you there's a matrix behind the race paradox. I describe organizations in four categories. The first one, if you look at like a quadrant, there's a top left quadrant, and this is explained in the book. It's called those organizations that are walking the walk. They're generally trying to do the right things. They're open, they're transparent, they recruit based on merit, but they've still got a way to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
So those organizations, we call it walking the walk.
Mm-hmm.
There are those organizations, secondly, what we call a cultural laggards. They are just languishing, right? They just don't do. They're stuck in the 18th century. They won't change unless they're forced to change. They
Mm-hmm.
don't understand or recognize gender, race. They just very myopic in their views and their thinking. They're very embedded in who they are as individuals and in their organizational culture. There are those organizations in the top right of the quadrant that I describe as beacons for change. And I think that speaks for itself, right? They want to change. They're generally doing all the right things. If you look at their organization, intersectionality exists across all parts of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And they're striving to do well. And this bottom right hand quadrant is the ones I call who are stuck in the paradox, high on talk, but low on walk, right? So they'll do the advertising around Black History Month in October in the UK and Black History Month in America in February. They'll do all of
Mm-hmm.
those things. When it comes to Pride Month, they'll celebrate all of these things. Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Yom Kippur, they'll celebrate Eid and the various religious festivals. They'll do all of those things. But when you look at the organization itself, I mean, in the UK, there's not one black CEO in a FTSE 100 business in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's
Wow.
it's your equivalent is with the Fortune 500 companies.
Mm-hmm.
You have very few black CEOs in the Fortune
In
500
the US, that's true.
in the US.
Yep.
So the parities are very much there.
Mm-hmm.
There's none in the UK today.
Mm-hmm.
But if you then look at senior leadership teams and what does that look like? So what I'm saying, those who are stuck in the paradox are talking a great game. If you look at their advertising on TV, there's lots of color and there's people of different genders and
Mm-hmm.
persuasions and all sorts of things going on, and that's fine, and that's important. And we've seen it from the likes of people like Target, as an example. In America, is a good example.
Yes.
But in the UK, that's equally comparable. There are lots of organisations are promoting and suggesting that they're doing all the right things, and they may well be,
Mm-hmm.
but it's going to take a cultural shift.
Yeah.
It takes leadership,
Yeah.
and it takes structures and systems to be re reconstructed in a way that it makes sense for those organizations, but also makes sense to make sure they have the right people on board in those businesses.
Yeah. We're going to talk about Target in just a few minutes. It's going to take bravery
Yeah.
and bold bravery and an admission from the decision makers that they can do better, that they can include more people, and that it may mean not power loss, but power sharing. Because a lot of this has to do with power and the perception of power. And for some who are in these decision making roles or the influencers, they don't want to give up their power to any degree, nor do they really want a power share. They want to hang on to what took place in the 1700s, 1800s, or whatever, because they're looking ultimately for their own benefit and how they want to maintain that kind of benefit and affluence and obviously money that goes with it that excludes all of the rest. And you're correct about white women. I did that little drum roll because we have to remind people here in the United States that the people who have benefited the most from DEI work have been white women. And they continue to. And then it is much broader. We include veterans. We include those who are neurodiverse. I mean, there are lots of other categories that make the whole topic of DEI significant and broad as well. Let me
Mhm.
go back, Dr. Brown, to ask you, what do you think is the essential reason why we keep getting stuck in this progress march? Here we have in the United States, we have a president who is clueless, who flip-flops quite a bit and panders heavily to right-wing racists, quite frankly. So his base will support him if he has no clothes on in the middle of the street. They'll justify that. And it's sadly it's about 30% of the United States. When I look at the rest, and maybe we'll talk about companies like Target. Target, they've suffered. They're under boycott. We have a number of organizations here in the U.S., including an organization headed by Reverend Dr. Jamal Bryant, who I know,
Mhm.
who's was a member of the AME Church, and now he pastors a large Baptist church in the Atlanta area. And so he has been the battle cry of don't go to Target, and it was supposed to be a 40-day fast. Now they've extended it to now it's gone now beyond Easter. It was supposed to end around Easter, but it's going to continue because they're still waiting to have some changes made systematically that they haven't reached in terms of Target. But in the meantime, Target has lost profit sharing, has gone down. Their revenues have gone down
Mhm.
um, because they're losing massive numbers of people who, like me, will not go in that store until they come back to their senses and do what they said they were going to do in 2020. They're one of the companies that you just talked about where, yes, they were going to do an awful lot in 2020, and they just reversed and went in the other direction after the election in November, and that's why the boycott continues. So, but give us your gut feeling or response about why this work is difficult and why these companies really don't understand the benefit, the real benefit of DEI.
Well, let me take you back to stage. I think if I tackle three areas, one, I want to talk about leadership. Two, I think about organization and cultures, and three, um, structures and systems. And in response to your question, right, where you think about a structure which has been built up over time, and you talk about power. Power is one of those structures, but organizations, they build systems and processes that benefits the business, and and if that's been embedded over time. Now, there's a guy called Gert Hofstede. He said that culture is the collective programming of the mind. So think about that, the collective programming of the mind. So you've been programmed and conditioned to think and act and behave in a particular way over a period of time. What you're asking people to do now is to say, don't think like that anymore. Think like this. But it's like a child. When my mum used to say, don't do that. You learn certain things, you indoctrinated with certain things, and you have certain values and beliefs. And if people continue to hold on to those values and beliefs, regardless of what you and I say, you need to change tomorrow. It is very difficult for them to unravel that.
Right.
Now, let's take that for a moment in terms of the culture of the business. So, if a CEO there's a culture in a business where people operate and act in a particular way, the staff will continue to act in a particular way. If in the boardroom they act and think and speak in a particular way, that translates throughout the organization consistently. So, unless you change the culture and the thinking within a business structure, then it won't manifest itself throughout the entire organization. Now, a case in point, in a boardroom, if you think about diversity, if someone's sitting there ahead of talking about diversity and inclusion and business case and making money and growth and profitability and drivers, and if diversity is not included as part of that conversation every time, like you look at the sales projection, like you look at your bottom line, it's not going to change very much, I would suggest, I would argue. And then what happens that people tend to go along to get along within the boardroom often. There was a case in the US, and I think it was John F. Kennedy who was involved in the Bay of Pigs,
Yes.
Cuba, and they talk about decision making in business schools, right? And they give that as an example often about how people make decisions. And you had mangers, you had generals, you had advisors in a room, and then someone saying, actually, we should go and do this over here, and we think the strategy is going to work. And even though there were people in the room who knew better, who were more skilled and had the acumen, they went along to get along. And Ivan Yanis calls this group thinking. So
Hmm.
you'll just become conditioned. You just go along to get along. You don't want to be a protagonist. You don't want to have conflict, right? You just want to do what everyone else is thinking because it's easier to see
Right.
consensus than
Right. And it's
do
safe.
and it's
It's
safe.
this is safe. Yeah.
And that's what happens in organizations.
Hmm.
You're worried about your job. What happens if I'm the dissenting voice? Well, we know what happened at the Bay of Pigs. They got defeated, right?
Well,
Because
the prevented war. I mean, it would have been an all out war um, uh, during that time period in the early 60s had cooler heads not prevailed.
so, but what I'm saying here is in the boardroom in businesses, there needs to be a cultural change
Hmm.
in the first instance, and I genuinely believe that. But it takes a leader to do that, right? And there's a guy, and there's a quote by you know is by Niccolo Machiavelli. People talk about Machiavellian and being Machiavellian is risk taking, but Machiavelli in the book called Print, and I think there's a quote I can remember. He says, "There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of the new order of things." So,
Hmm.
in other words, you have to be kind of brave to do something
Right.
different, right?
Exactly. Hmm.
You have to be brave. And I often think when you get into that power,
Hmm.
you're in a position of power and influence,
Hmm.
the company's doing well. Why am I going to upset the apple cart? Why do I want to do something different? So often, what then happens, all we do is go around in a bit of a circle, and the status quo
Yeah.
continues to permeate the organization. We talk about things, we do a few little initiatives here, over here, and then what we do, we come back to I can't remember the song, and I think it was Brian McKnight who said, "You start at one, you come back to that, you start at the beginning again. You just go around over a period of time
Circular. Yeah. The saying also is culture eats strategy for
for
lunch,
breakfast."
for breakfast
That's
all the time.
yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
that's the emotional safety component where, as you said, you go along to get along, see it all the time. What I also see are people who do all this talking, as you talked about with your quadrants, but then when it comes time to make decisions and to do things, they're nowhere to be found. Nowhere. They make up excuses all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so you need a structural change. You need to look at how am I recruiting?
Hmm.
How am I what's my supply diversity looking like? Because what we also know, there was a study done by Bain and Co. a few years ago that says that where you have diversity in your supply chain, actually the organization not only gets a better supply chain, and Target spoke to that as well. And Target were
Right.
talking about how well their diverse supply chain was doing for them.
Hmm.
So that's another conversation. But when you get that opportunity, we don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
so so we'll do whatever is necessary to deliver that
Hmm.
opportunity.
Hmm.
So, but more broadly, though, if you think about supply diversity, you think about recruitment, you think about senior leadership teams. What is your structure like in your organization? What's your
Hmm.
promotions like? What's your mentorship programs like? Do you have these initiatives what form part of your everyday culture? It's
Hmm.
not just an aberration. It's not just a moment
Hmm.
like the George Floyd moment, which was a tragic moment in our history, in the
Right.
global history.
Hmm.
But it was like everyone was compassionate and passionate at that moment. But
Well,
in 2025, we want a divorce.
I think also we saw the beginnings in 2020 of that culture shift. Is that for some, this was the first time that they witnessed such a tragedy that was televised, that you could not walk away from because it was so egregiously wrong and morally unfit. So it stripped away, it made people naked to really face their own vulnerability in terms of their cultural strategic marching, where they're headed, where they have been headed. And I think that's why we had this uprising with people saying, no, we have to stop this. And these companies moved forward. But then,
Yeah,
turn the page and things just sort of go back to one again. Go,
yeah,
you had a moment in time that could have really marched forward to a significant change factor across the world. And it hasn't. And in fact, now, because of people like Trump getting elected, people are digging deeply into their comfort zones because they don't want to get hit, deported. They don't want to be outed. And so it is much safer now just to either not talk about DEI work or just sort of run away from it. As we are recording this, hats off to Canada because Canada, with their election this week, pretty much said, hell
yes,
no. No, and thanks to Donald Trump, he made a reversal in the odds of the Liberal Party winning, which they did win big time, and they came from behind. They were 24 points behind. But when you
wow,
have a person like this president talking about making Canada the 51st state and doubling down on it, plus tariffs, that that changes people's culture really quickly, and that's why we now have a liberal party in Canada in terms of their full election possibilities. So, yeah, that was a sweet win this week.
no, it was indeed. But I look, from I like to think that I'm a bit of an optimist, and I think whilst we're in a state of flux right now, I think over time there will be a realization that that this is not sustainable. This
Mm,
view, and people cannot remain in the race paradox. And as the demographics change, as people change, and as people grow, um, there will be a shift.
yes,
That shift will definitely come without any doubt. It's timing. And yes, you're
right.
right. I think in 2020 there was a cultural shift. And I think this moment right now actually is going to be the genesis for another shift because I think
Mm,
people are looking and saying, "Oh, this is just so." I mean, and again, take our hats off to people like Harvard who've now pushed
mm.
back
Yes,
uh,
yes,
on some of this stuff. And
right.
when I look across from the UK, looking into America, and I
Hmm.
see that people are saying, actually, this is not right. We're not going to be shoehorned or bullied or coerced
Right.
into doing something that we don't fundamentally believe in.
That's true. That is
Um,
so true. And the thing is, Costco, give high props to Costco, the big
Absolutely,
box store. I know that you have a Costco card. I've seen it, saw a couple of
yeah,
months ago.
absolutely.
Costco, like Harvard, stood up and said, no, 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 thank you. We're fine. We have over 300,000 employees, millions of customers. Diversity works for us. We don't need to change anything. So their board of directors, followed by their stockholders, voted almost unanimously to move forward with their DEI work. And I'm sure Trump at this point in time is trying to figure out some way to strip down something with them so that he can bring them down because they stood up against him in bravery to declare the importance of DEI work.
No, they were definitely that leadership team is definitely, in a positive sense, Machiavellian.
Hmm.
They stood tall,
Right.
and I think, listen, when I talk about diversity, it's not just because it's a throwaway, trendy thing to talk about. It's good for your business,
Right.
and if we understand that notion, it's good for business. Then you start to tackle the structures. You say, actually, if this is really good for our business and we can improve our business profitability, our performance, and productivity, surely we should be looking at that as much as we look at sales, as much as we look at margins, as much as we look at productivity.
Hmm.
We need to look at diversity, and it should be on the agenda in the boardroom, in every boardroom. And if we
Yes.
do that, a difference will come because there'll be a
Absolutely. It should
cultural
be.
shift.
Yeah, it should be embedded in everything that we do, very much so. We are talking with Dr. Carlton Brown. He has a forthcoming book. I can't wait to read it. The Race Paradox: Why Organizations Fail on Race. It is going to be published by Jacaranda Books. I actually, because of you, interviewed Valerie Brandis, who is the founder of that wonderful publishing company. So that's a win-win, a real win-win.
Absolutely, absolutely. Amazing, amazing publishing company, Jacaranda.
Yes, absolutely. Please go back and you can watch. I think it is episode 51. You can watch episode 50, episode 50 with Valerie Brandis, and you can learn more about Jacaranda Books. Take us back and tell us about Carlton Brown, Doctor. Before he became Carlton Brown, give us a sense of your background, your origins. I'm always so fascinated by Black Brits who we talk about who come from elsewhere. Their roots obviously are planted in the UK, but their ancestral roots come from elsewhere. So tell us about that, Dr. Brown.
Thank you. So my mother and father were both from Jamaica, um, and they came to the UK in the 1961, 62. Bless their souls. So they both originated from Jamaica. But I've actually decided that I wanted to understand where my roots were really from
Yes.
historically, because I know
Yeah.
that we weren't originally from Jamaica.
Mhm.
So I understand that my heritage is from West Africa. So
Okay.
I think I'm 36% Nigerian
Okay.
and 35% Ghanaian, but it's West Africa in general.
Uh-huh.
So that's where I am. I was born in the UK, and so that's where I started. And I've got, I'm very proud of our culture, Jamaican culture, Caribbean culture, African culture, uh, both from a musical perspective, but also from a food perspective. And I know you like a good Caribbean dish. I know that I've heard that Boston has some great jerk chicken in Boston.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And my son-in-law is Jamaican American. So, yeah, I love the country of Jamaica. My son-in-law, daughter, granddaughters, they took their children to Jamaica for the first time this past Christmas and
Oh,
met
really?
my granddaughters met their 102-year-old grandfather for the first time, who's
Wow,
sharp as a
amazing.
tack, still moving forward, and met my son-in-law's 103-year-old godmother who is still
Wow,
living. So yeah, I love the country, love the people, and yep, that part of my family, very very much so.
brilliant, brilliant. So I grew up in the UK, and my early, I went to college. But my early career, I started off in retail. I worked in a retail outlet as a
Hmm.
retail manager. So that's what I
Ah.
did. And from there, I wanted more for what I was doing in my life at the time. And I got a job in a corporate on the bottom of the sales run.
Hmm.
So, and I got into this corporate organization, and I started at the bottom, and I ended up working there for 16 years.
Wow.
There are FTSE 100 businesses, and I ended up being a regional director for the south of England and Northern Ireland when I left that organization.
Hmm.
And it was a great learning curve for me, that working in that particular space. And then I got headhunted to work for another corporate,
Mhm.
um, as a national sales and marketing director for
Hmm.
3 years. Uh, so then I decided that I was doing too much traveling with a young family at the time. And so I then decided to start a consultancy business.
Ah.
And my first client was my old company.
Oh, that's the way to do it.
So I worked in the corporate space for 20 odd years. And then I've been working for myself as a consultant ever since. But in the interim, we've um, started businesses and sold businesses along that journey as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so we've done that. We worked. I had a hygiene business.
Hmm.
So things such as I don't know if you what do you call them? We call them sanitary bins.
Sanitary napkins.
When you go to the ladies' bathrooms,
Hmm.
and so we used to have those bins that you'd have to put your receptacles in,
Oh, yes. Uh-huh. Okay.
and we provided a service for doing those things.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And the hand dryers you get in the washrooms and the
Yes.
air fresheners, we did all of those things. So we grew a business, started it from zero, grew it, and then we sold it. We got a chance to sell it, and we grew it and we sold it. So
Hmm.
that's what we did for a period of time. And then I throw it back into, but I thought there was something missing. So when I turned 40, I'm still 40 in my head,
In
right?
your mind.
In my mind, absolutely. So I decided that I wanted to go back and study,
Mm,
and I went back into education, and I did my first degree in leadership and management,
hmm
and then followed. Then I went on to do an MBA in business administration,
hmm
and I then after that I just said, I might as well carry on, and I just went and did my PhD, my doctorate in business performance management.
mm.
So that was all done in a 10-year period.
Wow. I mean, and the beauty of it is that you had all this retail corporate experience that you brought into your degree. So you probably were in class with 20-year-olds, but you were light years ahead of them because of your experience that you had.
And I found it was so invaluable. The work experience, it could never be undervalued, and experience could never be undervalued.
Hmm
But what it did give me was the insights to apply the theory to practice. And that was the critical part. So when I'm in a conversation, I can say, well, actually, whether you're talking about this particular model, that framework, that's really interesting, that works. Or
hmm
actually, that's a challenge here for an entrepreneur, or that's a challenge for thinking about a corporate organization. How can you navigate that in real terms? Not just about thinking about the theory. You've got to think about it in real terms, in practice, in a practical
Right.
way, in a pragmatic way. So that
Right.
that taught me a lot. And now, I've been writing. I've been writing lots of articles and entrepreneurship, but also on diversity, corporate social responsibility. I've published a couple of books previously, which are more academic, and now I'm publishing the book which comes out, The Race Paradox, in October.
hmm
And I curated a book called a report called the Black Entrepreneur Report in the UK, which has led now for me hosting the UK Black Business Entrepreneur Conference, which we host every year, trying to advocate for real change and bring
Wow.
in various stakeholders from the public, private, third sectors, and our community together and say, look, there are structural challenges in the UK in terms of access to finance,
hmm
access to mentorship, access to opportunities.
hmm
So how do we make that difference? How do we change that? So the UK Black Business Entrepreneur Conference was designed to be a gateway for change.
And I'm excited about it because on the 25th of June, I'm going to be one of the speakers at the conference. So, super excited. I'm bringing my daughter and granddaughters with me to London. And I'm very, very excited to learn myself, but also to share the knowledge that I have on the panels that I'll be participating in.
I can't tell you how excited we are to have you as well, Carole. I genuinely are. And we're gonna utilize your skills and your your knowledge and insights all day. So I look forward to having you participate. But yeah, I mean that's the thing. If we want to make difference, because if nothing changes, Carole, nothing
Mhm.
changes.
Right,
So
right.
we need to do something that makes a change, right? So we have to make
Well,
a shift in what this narrative. So if nothing
I
changes,
can't
nothing changes.
wait. And I'm looking at the conference that's coming up, the work that you're doing as providing the gateway to the change, the cultural change that we talked about earlier that is so important for businesses and organizations in the United Kingdom, the United States, other parts of the world as well. Super. This has been great. I have three questions to ask you before we wind down. I ask all my guests. Number one is, what do people not know about Dr. Carlton Brown?
I've been married for 30 years.
Ooh.
I know
That's a
I'm
privilege.
I'm too young.
No,
I was married at 6, right?
it's six.
Yeah, I've been married 30 years.
That's awesome. Any children?
Yes, we have two boys,
Oh, wonderful.
and so
How old are they?
they've gone through university now, and they're flying their own things. One's a teacher
Oh.
at school doing. He works with uh, children who are challenged in schools. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So and the other one is plays sport, but he also works for local government.
Wonderful. Very good. Very, very good. Number two, what is your favorite book or movie in addition to the race paradox?
In addition to those paradox, um, it's a really the book one is a really various one. There's several. Um, there are several books. um, Tanisi Coates, Tanahasi
Mm,
Coates.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
I like his book. I also Channing Brown.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
Tahisi Coates, he's very popular here. Has had dialogues after coming back from Israel and how that this is before October 7th. But yeah, he's very popular here. Great, great, very good.
so there's two books, and also and there's a book many years ago called The Magic of Thinking Big by
Oh, yes.
Is it Daniel Schwartz or
Hey,
David Schwartz?
David Schwartz, I believe.
Schwartz.
Yes. Okay.
And that kind of always thinking about us as a community. Often, sometimes we get conditioned to thinking small.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was a book I read years ago.
Mm.
I've always had that. I've read it several times.
That's a
So
good
yeah,
one. That's a good one. All right, three good ones. Very good. And in all of the world, what's on your bucket list in terms of travel? Where would you like to go in the future?
India,
Ah.
Ethiopia,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gambia, Senegal.
Okay.
I have a thing about the continent. I want to,
Yeah.
I've been to Ghana. I haven't been to Nigeria. Nigeria was definitely going to be on my list as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely
Mm-hmm.
the continent, India.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah,
Love it. Okay.
Ethiopia.
We have you traveling all over the place. That's great. I've been to India many times. Love India. It's one of my favorite countries, so I can see why you'd want to go there. And like you, I have other places in Africa where I need to go. Absolutely. Yes. Dr.
Brilliant.
Carlton Brown, you are fantastic. I look forward to physically seeing you in the next few weeks. The author of the upcoming book, The Race Paradox: Why Organizations Fail on Race. It'll be out later on this year. He is the CEO of Aspire Consultancy with quite an incredible retail background. That is amazing. Retail and sales background. Now we know why he does so well. Dr. Carlton Brown, thank you so much for joining me on Conversations with Carol.
Thank you so much, Cara. It's been my pleasure.
All
Thank you for
right.
inviting me.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Carol. Spread the word and tell friends and colleagues that this podcast is tailor made for them. Make sure you subscribe, and we welcome your comments and reviews on your favorite podcast platform. Visit us at carolcopelandthomas.com and listen to all of the episodes and learn about my speaking services there. Thanks again, and we'll see you back next week for an exciting new show. See you soon.